this season, obviously, like I mentioned, they're 0-2 against them, but both games are on the tail end of a back-to-back. They've been able to match up well against the Nuggets. They matched up really well against Durant and the Suns when they played in the playoffs a couple years ago. So I think for the defensive struggles the Wolves are going through right now, I think the advantage they would have in a playoff series against these teams is the experience they have and the success that they've had. There is a blueprint for them to defend the Nuggets well, and it starts with taking away Jokic the passer, making him be the scorer. They have experience playing against these good teams. Again, it's just a matter of getting there. And another big thing too is having the stamina to of Denver, but then also you're probably gonna have to go through Denver and Oklahoma City.
It's nice to see the Wolves get off to a solid start. So far, it's very early, so it might be unfair, but kind of what's the most defining trait of this team this season? Is it different than previous seasons, or do you think the team has taken on characteristics of seasons past, or do you think this year is different?
Yeah, I think this year so far has kind of been an inverse of how this team usually operates. Usually they're a defensive-oriented team that offensively subpar to par. This year it's been for many games completely the opposite. They're 5th right now in offensive rating, 11th in defensive rating, so it's on the upswing. But yeah, like you mentioned, Justin, there's a lot of expectations coming into the season. 2 Western Conference Finals appearances. The expectation now is to win a championship. And to win a championship, I think the Wolves are aware that, you want to be a top 10 team in offense and defense. And we're seeing the defense start to, like I mentioned, swing upward. But they've been working through some struggles, particularly on the defensive end. The Wolves really expected, I think, to get off to a fast start, probably even better than 9-5. They had the quiet off season, and the buzzword up in these parts has been continuity. Chris Finch said before the season, I liked how he put it. He says, continuity is only good when it pays dividends early. Other than that, you're just like everybody else. And Ant also mentioned, or Anthony Edwards before the season also mentioned too, that the quiet off season should allow them to start fast when teams like Denver, they made some new additions. Houston, obviously, with Kevin Durant. But we're seeing a team right now in Minnesota that definitely is not a polished product, probably not as productive on both sides of the ball as maybe they expected to be. And the most glaring thing I would say in regards to the 9-5 start is that, and I've wrote about this, all 9 of the wins have been against teams under 500. All 5 of the losses have been against teams over 500. And the question is, what do you make of that? Are the Wolves worse than what their record leads on? And to that, I would say, some context is needed, because in 5 of those losses, Ant missed because, he was out with the hamstring injury. So he missed 2 of those games against, teams over 500. Those same games, Jaylen Clark, who we might talk about more, who's been integral in the defense, he missed those same games with Ant. Those games are against the Lakers and the Nuggets. And then when Ant did return, it was against the Knicks, who are over 500. He, was a little rusty both times. So the Wolves, have lost to Denver twice this season, both at home. Both of those losses were on the back end of a back-to-back for the Wolves. For all the caveats you can throw at the 0-5 against teams over 500, again, offensively, this team still, has some issues to iron out, particularly regarding the defense with Rudy Gobert off the court. They've struggled to defend the rim when Julius Randle and Naz Reid are out there together. But at the same time, 9-0 against sub 500 teams, that's not been something this team has done under the Chris Finch regime. They lost 24 games last season when they were favored to win. That was the most in the NBA. And it's important. It's almost equally as important to beat the bad teams, because in April, when you look back on the season, it'll probably be 2 or 3 games deciding if you've got home court advantage in the first round or not. So all of that's to say, I think, Minnesota having this more professional mindset against the bad teams will bode well for the rest of the year.
Excellent points there, Charlie, and covered a whole lot of substance there with the points you made. I want to zoom in on kind of the change of, I don't know if you would say it's a change of the identity of the team, but can you focus in on for us why the defensive struggles in particular? You mentioned the times that, of course, they're stronger with Rudy Gobert on the court and weaker with Naz Reid and Julius Randle combining. But do you think it's because there is continuity with this team,
right,
and has been a strength for them? So why do you think the struggles with defense?
Well, I do think part of it is losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's one of those defenders that just makes up for other people's mistakes. And they've been lucky enough to replace him defensively, at least, with Jaylen Clark, who I mentioned. He's honestly been too important to the defense guys, because when he's off the floor, they've not been the same defensive team. So that's been the positive part. I think honestly, when you look at this team, they've got the tools to be a good defensive squad. Again, they're pretty much the exact same minus Nickeil as they were last season, and they were a good defensive team last year. They were a great defensive team 2 years ago. I think what it comes down to is just a greater buy-in from the team for a full 48 minutes every single night. The Nuggets were in town on Saturday, and I thought they were able to generate quality offense far too easily. Jamal Murray got past the point of attack defense with little resistance, and then the Nuggets were able to produce open shots, quality shots with one pass, which that just can't happen when Nikola Jokic is on the floor. He's going to do things like that, but you really can't let that happen. And historically, the Wolves had defended Jokic and the Nuggets well, and so far this season they haven't. And it's kind of been emblematic of their struggles defensively, is just, like I said, just buying in and constantly rotating. Ant called the Thunder last season 15 puppets on a string. And that's kind of what the Wolves were like 2 years ago. They were all together. They were for a full 48 minutes. And that's what it's going to take for this defense to, they're right outside the top 10 right now, but I believe this team wants to be better than that. They want to be able to rely on their defense every night, regardless if the team's over 500 or under 500. They want that defense to be the backbone. So then when the offense does inevitably go astray, right, where they're playing on the tail end of a back-to-back, when Ant doesn't have his regular heroics, that defense they want to be able to rely on. And like I mentioned, I think it just is going to take a better collective buy-in from the team.
You talked a little bit about the point of attack. And so I'm always curious when I'm watching games, and I wanted your perspective. Who are opposing teams hunting on the POA on the Wolves right now?
I would say probably Mike Conley when he's out there. There was a couple times in that Nuggets game where Jamal Murray just got past him. And to Mike Conley's credit, he's been able to remain a solid defender, even like against the Lakers in the playoffs last year. He was defending Rui Hachimura, and Hachimura, you would think on paper he's so much bigger than Conley, stronger, that he would be able to take care of that matchup. But yeah, Conley was able to kind of keep him in check. But yeah, I mean, Mike, he's defensively definitely probably, one of the weaker links. Certainly when Rob Dillingham is out there, that's the big one, and that's kind of the biggest reason why he's struggled to find consistent minutes. Right now, he is kind of in the rotation in some capacity. But Dillingham is a guy where, for as hard as he tries defensively, it's just his how he's built right now, his strength, his negative wingspan. Teams are just they're like you mentioned, Alan. They're going to target players, and Dillingham is that player. He's a point guard, so he's going to defend the ball handler a lot. And there's ways to work around when players get targeted, right? The Wolves have a great defender in McDaniels, Clark, DiVincenzo even is solid. So, and Anthony Edwards obviously is a good defender. But yeah, I would say for sure Dillingham and Conley are the two that get targeted the most.
Charlie, I'm wondering too, in addition to the learning curve that you just covered there for those players, defense is so much about effort. And this team has had some long runs together. Is there any sense that maybe there's a confidence there as well, that when we need to turn this on, when we need to hit this defensive switch, we'll do it? Or any sort of sense of that you're getting from the team?
Yeah, I don't. So there was a lot of concern, I think, entering last season that there was going to be that type of mindset where it's like, Anthony Edwards talked at length when the Wolves got bounced by Dallas about, like, we're just going to be back here. We're going to be back here. We're going to be back here. That was the mindset. And then Finch was like, there's a lot of stuff we have to do before we get back here. And I think to the Wolves' credit, to Ant's credit, they did it. They got back there, and they worked through a lot of struggles. And this season, the struggles are a little different. I think they've undergone more change than was initially anticipated. And I think that's part of it. Like regarding the bench, you only lose Nickeil, but Dante starts in place of Mike. That changes the dynamic. Dillingham's getting minutes. Shannon gets hurt, and he wasn't looking great. So I don't know if it's so much a mindset thing of maybe, in a way like overconfidence. I don't think it's that, because again, we're also seeing them be far more mature against the bad teams. So I just think they're working through the things that are relatively common early in a season. None of their issues right now, aside from maybe the Julius Nas defensive pairing, are terribly concerning. So yeah, I think this team's shown enough that they won't get complacent, right? Because they've had this success. I think they will keep their head down and keep working, as evidenced by their 9-0 record against the bad teams.
So we're headed close to the end of the NBA Cup. We have Christmas. What kind of benchmarks do you see in terms of this team needs to hit in order to kind of, maintain their positioning within the Western Conference, besides what you see on the defensive end?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to if disregarding the defense, offensive consistency is a big thing. Ball movement with the Wolves has kind of been like, Finch likes to call Jaden McDaniels the barometer of the offensive success. And what that means is when the Wolves are playing the right way, when they're moving the ball consistently, Jaden is the beneficiary. And now this season, we're seeing Jaden kind of develop into his own scorer, where he's not totally dependent on good ball movement, but the Wolves are dependent on that good ball movement. And I think when you have a team that has Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle in particular, who they'll go into isolation and have these no pass possessions, and they'll take these shots where if they miss, it's like, wow, that was a horrible shot. But if it goes in, that's a great shot. And ultimately, that's the type of offense that the Wolves are going to produce in some capacity, and you have to live with the results. Finch likes a free-flowing offense. But again, I do think just keeping the emphasis on playing the right way, limiting turnovers also has been a problem with, and I think part of that is like, if the Wolves are going to be higher in turnovers, but they're consistently playing the right way, in a way, you might be able to live with that. So yeah, I'd say just offensive consistency would be, the biggest thing, as we approach, Christmas and the All-Star break.
It's interesting. You touched on Jaden McDaniels, and I think he's probably playing himself into the most improved player conversation with this. He primarily, as has been like a great defender, but kind of a not that great on offense, but we're seeing this turnaround. What do you credit that with? Is this player growth? Is this what's happening here?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. It starts with the Wolves, Chris Finch in particular, deploying McDaniels in a way that best suits his game. Early on last season, I was very critical of Jaden, and he was an offensive liability next to Ant, guys, and he was not making open 3-point shots, and those were really that was really all of his offense was just 3-point shooting. He was standing in the corners, on the wings, being a 3-and-D wing. And I made the claim, I'm like, I don't think Jaden can be a long-term fit with the Wolves if he can't shoot 40% from 3. I was naive in that assumption because I didn't expect Finch to kind of change and toward the end of last season, or the second half of last season, put the ball in McDaniels' hands more. Just let him go to work in isolation and in the mid-range. That's where he's really, really good. And so I think that was part of it. And then now we're just seeing a very confident Jaden McDaniels. And the Wolves have talked about this. They're telling him, like, you are a good scorer. They're backing up his, so he doesn't have any doubts. So yeah, he's really blossomed, like you mentioned, Alan, into the most improved player of the year conversation. He's kind of formed a big head, or a big three, with him, Julius, and I think the biggest thing with McDaniels, and I've wrote about this, is his efficiency. When he has big games, when he's scoring north of 20 points, he doesn't miss. These 8 of 11 games from him, 9 of 10, like, they're very common. And it would, you look at the efficiency he's had to start the season. The Wolves as a team have shot really well. When you look at his efficiency, you'd be like, well, can the guy shoot north or around 50% from 3 for an entire season, when last season he struggled to even shoot 40% from 3? Well, I think, maybe not the 3-point shooting will translate over a full season, but the efficiency will. Historically, whenever he's had the opportunity to score more than 20 points, whether with Ant out, Julius out, both of them out, he's done it with great efficiency. And I think that's a very important part of his fit with the Wolves, because as I mentioned, Ant and Julius take a ton of shots. They're naturally going to take more shots, even if the Wolves are looking to get Jaden more involved. So if he can remain that efficient scorer, where he only needs like 10 attempts to be a 20-point per game guy, and if you can get 18 points a night from your third option, you're going to be set up well, for the regular season and into the playoffs.
Absolutely. It sounds like he's he's kind of the X factor for that team, like the barometer, like you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, for how they're playing. I wanted to pick your brain about maybe the number one concern when the season started for the Wolves, and maybe it remains the number one concern. But I heard a lot of different personalities kind of freaking out about the point guard position and rotation for the Timberwolves. How is that going so far now that we are a couple weeks into the season? Is it still kind of the primary concern that you're seeing with this team?
Yeah, they've definitely been working through it. That first game in Portland, when Finch kind of the report came out from Chris Haynes that Dante DiVincenzo was going to start that game. We were all, a little bit caught off guard because we were under the assumption that Mike Conley, he was saying during the, preseason that he wanted to be the quarterback of the offense. Just hit Julius, hit Ant. And then Dante starts. And in Portland, I think he had like 6 turnovers or something like that. It was just not good. Portland's pressure is very in your face, and DiVincenzo's bringing the ball across the timeline, and it was not working. What we're seeing now, I think, with that starting lineup, it is working because DiVincenzo is not being viewed or used as a point guard. Anthony Edwards has taken significant growth or significant steps as a primary ball handler. Julius Randle, he's a threat to drop a triple-double every night, and he's taken a lot of the primary ball handling duties, especially in the half court. And another big reason why I think they've been able to play without, because that was also part of it last season, is the last couple of years, is the Wolves were really dependent on having a point guard on the floor, having Mike Conley on the floor. When he was off, the Wolves offense struggled. It's not been the same this year, and even when Mike's in the game, he's more just a 3-point shooter. He's really not even playing like a point guard. And a big reason, for that, like I mentioned, Julius is, playing more like a point guard, Ant's playing more like a point guard, but then the Wolves are also playing faster, and they did that a lot against the Mavericks last night at home. Every time they turned Dallas over, every time they got a defensive rebound, they were off to the races. And that is going to mitigate a lot of the point guard, primary ball handling issues, if there are still some that remain. I'm not terribly concerned, Matt, to be honest. I think they've been working through it nicely. Rob Dillingham has taken some steps, with the limited time he's had. He still looks, he's not the Mike Conley replacement right now, right? He's still a ways out. But with that in mind, I definitely think it's not quite as big of an issue or a concern as it was in the offseason.
You talked about Anthony Edwards increasing and becoming more of the primary playmaker. Is there any concern? Because I when that happens, I think sometimes you see other parts of the game deteriorate. Is there any concern that you're going to see that with Anthony Edwards?
I don't think so, just because we've seen him be really, really good this season while, dribbling the ball more and just be more of like a point guard. He wants to win MVP. I think, a part of that is just having the ball in his hands more often. And he's a really, really good 3-point shooter. That was one of the goals he set for himself last season, was he wanted to become a better 3-point shooter, and then he leads the league in makes, and he shoots 40%. He does the best he possibly could in that regard. So I wouldn't say that him being playing more like a point guard is going to take away from his game. He's in a little bit of a lull right now shooting the ball, but overall we've seen him be kind of like this inevitably great this season. And I've said that before. And I think if you look at like every MVP, because again, that's what he wants to be, they're inevitably great. Every night they come into the game, and regardless of what the defense tries to do, regardless of any outside factors, they're just the same great player every night. And Anthony Edwards has kind of been that in spurts this season, whether it's been entire game takeovers, like the one he had in Portland to begin the game with or to begin the season with 41 points, or he'll take over to end a half, or to begin, the third quarter, whatever. And I think that, is a good, kind of benchmark that we're seeing with his success, even, because I wouldn't even say that he's playing a different style of basketball right now, Alan, so that's the other part of it. Like, I don't watch Ant and see a completely different schematic approach the Wolves are taking with him. It's all been very natural. And Ant is just so good. Like I mentioned, he challenged himself to lead the league to shoot threes better, and then he leads the league in 3-point makes. He's so good that I think, you want the ball in his hands more often, and more importantly, you want him to make the correct reads out of that, and become a better passer, which again, his connection with Rudy Gobert is still a work in progress, but he is getting better, and he keeps getting better every season, and you can even boil it down, game by game, you're seeing these progressions from him, even, while having the ball in his hands more often.
So what are the odds that he has a shot of winning MVP? It just seems like it's such a tight race.
Yeah.
Unless there's a ton of injuries, I just don't see him working his way in there, especially now it's possible. Especially with Victor Wembanyama. I mean, I love him, but I just think with his injuries, I don't know, I feel uneasy. But there's also, I live in Denver, maybe I'm biased, but there's always Jokic. He's always consistent. So it's very monster. Right. It's just hard to like take him out.
It
so
is.
Just with Ant, like, what do you think he's going to have to do to kind of work his way to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I don't know how you can be past SGA and Jokic right now, especially Jokic. But with what the Thunder are doing, they're 14-1. J-Dub's not played. Like, it's just it is. I don't know. I don't know if I've got a great answer for that, because only thing he can do is just be the best player in his, at this stage of his career. And you also have to remember he's still quite a bit younger than Jokic and SGA. So what does he look like at 29? What does he look like? That's where he'll probably be more of a legit candidate to win MVP. But again, when Ant made that proclamation in the preseason that he wanted to win MVP, he wanted to win a championship, and he wanted to make an all-defensive team, you kind of hear sometimes players say stuff, and you're like, yeah, it's the preseason. The records are 0-0, and everybody's an MVP until proven otherwise. But with a guy like Ant, it's like you kind of believe him. You kind of you place a little bit more stock in that, because he's that type of talent. But you're right, Justin. I think the talent surrounding him, obviously in the Western Conference in particular, it's going to be tough to crack through, at least right now, barring an injury or something like that.
Yeah, great points. And brought to my mind that it does feel almost like we're in this sort of weird holding pattern with Anthony Edwards, because he's accomplished so much so early in his career, especially with those 2 deep playoff runs. It kind of feels like we're in this holding pattern where we know he's great, and we're kind of waiting for him to get that championship at some point, if that does happen, which, like Jokic was in that holding pattern for a little while too, before the Nuggets eventually broke through. I guess just with what you see and the conversations you see when you're doing your research and everything, where do you feel like Anthony Edwards' status is in the league right now? It's a weird question, but sometimes I feel like because of all that he legitimately has accomplished to this point, sometimes he feels a bit forgotten.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's kind of the cool thing about Ant, is he's like that household name, right? He's in the Sprite commercials, and just everybody, I mean, he's the marquee player every night that opposing teams game plan for him. I do think you're right, though. It's kind of an indictment on the NBA culture. Until you win a championship, you're not really you are on a lower tier, right? And again, I go back to how young he is, and we've been saying this forever. It's like how the joke was like, Jason Tatum was 19 years old for 5 years. It just kind of feels like that with Ant. Like he's still just so young, and he's in these conversations with these players who, aside from Wemby, he's, just a player of his own, but he's in these conversations with players that are still very much older than him and have a lot more experience. So, and that was part of the thing I mentioned. I wrote for Zone Coverage early, or in the summer. I was like, about how Ant to win MVP needed to be more consistent. And you look at his body of work last season, career high 27.6 points a game, and you're like, that's great. How does he get better from that? Because you need, maybe you don't need to average 32 points like SGA did. And it's tough. It's asking a lot of a player. But again, we go back to everything he's already accomplished, and he's up for the challenge. I think, that's part of the reason the Wolves traded Cat, is they want to win a championship. They want to have their best chance to win a championship around Edwards. And I think if you look back on Ant's time with the Wolves, let's assume he spent his whole career here, and they don't have a championship, I do think that would be a disappointment. So that definitely is the goal, the hope, the plan. They're planning around that. They know they've got a player who is capable of leading them to a championship, but I hope that doesn't take too much away from the fact, if the fact he's so young, doesn't have a championship, he's still a great player for what he is, or for how old he is.
And I don't know your thoughts, but it also adds weight, in my opinion, that he's doing this in Minnesota. And I don't mean that with any sense of disrespect, but let's be real that NBA championships haven't happened. So I mean, there was, last I can remember, the Timberwolves being this much in the headlines was when Kevin Garnett, was taking them to that playoff run. He took them through, and there, it felt like there was deeper cultural impact. Now, Kevin Love had a great stretch in Minnesota too. That was awesome to watch, but it feels like that wasn't quite on the level of Kevin Garnett because of the postseason factor,
Yeah.
So seeing that with Anthony Edwards, I don't know. I just think it's going to be so impactful to his legacy if he gets it done in Minnesota. Do you get the same sense?
Yeah, certainly. And I get the sense that he wants to do it here. There's always that conversation of, because it's such a player-driven league now, players decide, what they want to do, where they want to go. And he just seems like an old school type of guy on the court, right? He wants to, he genuinely wants to bring a championship to Minnesota, and that's unique. And I think it's, you mentioned, there really hasn't, they're obviously, the Wolves have never had a championship, and they're a small market team. And usually it's the big markets that are going to be in the conversation to win a championship every year. But look at the Thunder last year and what SGA did. Yeah. There's, for as much of a headache as the implementation of the second apron was for teams, this is where it really does prove fruitful to be able to be like, we might not have as much money. We might not be the Los Angeles Dodgers, right? We might not be the Lakers, the Warriors, or whatever. All these teams that can spend a boatload and they've got the nice weather, they've got the good weather and whatever. Because of the second apron, it keeps the playing field a little bit more level. It makes teams have issues, flaws. They're not going to be perfect. There's no super teams. And that is mostly, is to the advantage of guys like Ant, SGA, Giannis, he won it with Milwaukee. These players, Cade Cunningham in Detroit. They're not playing in big markets, but they're great players, and they're going to have the opportunity to have a good team around them without having teams, in the NBA significantly better than them for factors they can't control.
I wanted to throw a couple of years out because we're talking about championships, 2017 and 1991. So those are the years that the Lynx won and the Twins won. I mean, Minnesota is starved for this, right? I mean, if Ant brings this, is this kind of a Mount Rushmore of Minnesota sports moment for him?
Totally. Yeah. No, it's for the whole state. Yeah, it's been pretty dormant for a lot of years. And I was talking to somebody about this too, and it's a good thing to be where the Wolves are right now. And I understand that they're at this Western Conference Finals hump. They're 9-5, and I'm talking about issues that they have. 10 years ago, the Wolves are 9-5, and what is there a breach in the matrix? What's going on? Why is this team 9-5? Now 9-5 is like, hey, the defense is bad, whatever. Rudy is too important, whatever. So this is a good place to be. It's a good place to be obviously from like an ownership perspective, right? You're selling tickets, although the Wolves don't rank particularly well in ticket sales, but still, you're getting fans to come to games, to be excited, new jerseys, new ownership, whatever, all these things. This is a good place to be, and you can circle a lot of it back to Ant and just his gravity. When he's out there, when he's playing, fans want to come see him. I was in Cleveland, and I went to dinner, and the server who was waiting on us, Ant was questionable going into the game. The Wolves were playing the Cavs, and he was genuinely he had tickets to the game the next night. And he was genuinely nervous that Ant wasn't going to play. And he ended up playing and scoring 41 points. The Wolves got blown out. But I just thought about that guy the entire game because he spent, that's the only reason he went to go to that game. He wasn't really a Cavs fan, wasn't a big NBA fan. He was an Anthony Edwards fan. And this type of gravity, like you mentioned, is not something they've had since Kevin Garnett. And I'd make the argument I wasn't alive when Kevin Garnett was doing his thing, but just the aura he has, which is kind of a weird word in the culture today, but the presence he has is really special. And I don't know if this franchise has really ever had that. And again, like I said, if you look back on Ant's time with the Wolves and he doesn't have a championship, that will be a disappointment. I understand. But if you look back and you're like, this team was a Western Conference Finals team every year, like they were threatening every year, that's a good place to be. And again, I wish that NBA fans maybe would take appreciation in some of the smaller things. It's not just championship or bust every year. So yeah, but totally though. I mean, if the Wolves win a championship with Ant, that would be a monumental, historic day in Minnesota.
Gosh, I have to mention, it reminds me of the Minnesota Vikings when they were right in that cusp of winning a Super Bowl, and just unfortunately things didn't work out. Of course I'm rooting for the Timberwolves to get it done. I just think it's such a great narrative if they do. But people still talk about those Vikings teams quite a bit. So I think your point holds well that even if they don't get over that hump, this very, very memorable squad right here and what they're getting done.
Yeah.
That consistent greatness that they've had for the last few years now.
Yeah. Charlie, I want to touch on a point you made, and correct me if I'm wrong. You said that the Timberwolves, they rank towards the bottom of the league with attendance. Is that?
Yeah, I don't have the direct number in front of me, but I think a big reason why is just ticket prices. It's expensive. It's expensive to even go to games. Like the parking around the stadium is like we park at a ramp, and it was $16 for a lot of years, and it was $20. Now it's $25. So it's this way everywhere. You know, I was trying to see if I was trying to plan a trip to go catch the Wolves in LA, and everything's just so expensive, at a grand scale in the NBA. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is too, like the Wolves, I think like last season and the year before, the teams reported that they sold out every night. And that doesn't mean that every seat's full every night. So tickets could be resold and not sold. Those count toward bodies in the seats. But I think part of it is this season is just they've had two back-to-back. They had two back-to-backs. They had that one back-to-back against Denver that was at like 8:30, just an odd time. Ant missed those 4 games, so I don't read too much into it. And then like last night against the Mavs, it was the upper deck was there's quite a few open seats, but it was against the Mavs, right? So it was it's still early in the season. And to get buy-in from the fans this early, I think is somewhat of a struggle maybe for certain teams, especially with Minnesota and how the Vikings, as you mentioned, they kind of dominate everything right now.
Makes sense. I want to touch on some other league topics if you don't mind. And Matt and I were discussing this before we came on air, and that is a lot of injuries to a lot of star players and the increase of calf injuries. Just wondering, do you think this is hysteria for nothing in terms of his injuries? It's part of the NBA season. People get hurt. Or do you think there's something more serious going on in terms of what you're seeing so far from an injury standpoint?
Yeah, I definitely do think it's concerning. You go back to Tyrese Halliburton's injury in the playoffs, Jason Tatum. I mean, it is becoming more and more. It's the injuries are becoming increasingly more apparent and relevant. I don't know if there's like a specific a reason. I think the biggest reason is these games are just being played at a faster and faster pace. The Wolves, that was their biggest emphasis coming into the season, is they want to be a faster paced team. With faster pace, you just increase the odds of injuries. And I guess the other thing is these back-to-backs are tough on players, and that could lead to just general fatigue. I know a lot of people like to say maybe you have to shorten the season. I'm not sure that's the solution. I don't know if there's a great solution to this. I think it's just, like I said, I think it really does just boil down to play style. I actually, regarding the back-to-backs, I think they're actually a good wrinkle in the NBA schedule. I don't know what the statistics say if they do truly lead to more injuries, but I think it's that's a good part of the NBA. It's a unique wrinkle of things because there's certain players, Embiid for times, Zion Williamson, they don't play in both games of back-to-backs, and that's something you kind of have to keep in mind when you have a player on a team. That's the Wolves have been a good back-to-back team, so I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with the scheduling. I do think it just comes down to teams are just they're playing faster than ever before.
So Charlie, I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit more. We've been talking about NBA expansion, and I think the two most likely places are probably Seattle and Las Vegas. Now those would be Western Conference teams. And if you look at a map and you look at kind of who's closest to where, I mean, does it make sense then for Minnesota becoming a Central Division Eastern Conference team?
Yeah, no, it does. It definitely does. They're near the top, if not at the top, in miles traveled every year. They have these just stupid back-to-backs where they're like in Denver one night, in Minneapolis the next. They had a really stupid one last season. They were playing the Thunder at home on like a Monday night, say it was. And then both teams caught a flight. The game got over at like 11:30 because it was a late game because it was a national television. Both teams hopped on a flight and they flew down to Oklahoma and they played each other the next night in OKC. It was just so weird. And the Wolves traveling, they're centrally located and they're making these trips to the West Coast a ton. I like West Coast games. I think that Denver, Lakers, Warriors, the games out there typically are a lot of fun. They're enjoyable, but it would make a lot of sense for the Wolves to move to the East, especially if you look at like the division they could be with Detroit and Chicago and Milwaukee. That would promote a lot more traveling for local fans to go to the games. i.e., more revenue for the NBA, right? Like that would be good. So yeah, I definitely think if that happens, the Wolves should definitely be an Eastern Conference team. If not them, Memphis. A little biased. I hope it is the Wolves, right? Eastern Conferences tended to be a little bit more favorable. Now with two, expansion teams, if that does happen, let's say Seattle and Las Vegas get teams, then maybe the West becomes a little bit more watered down because they'll be, behind the eight ball the first couple seasons. But still, I would definitely be in favor of the Wolves moving to the East for sure.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Charlie, I'll try not to belabor the point, but there was research that I looked at back when I was a grad student that showed that teams with the most travel mileage did have a competitive disadvantage and were more likely to lose on certain nights. And so if I were a Timberwolves fan, I certainly would be rooting for that change to happen because it could give you maybe an easier or better competitive advantage.
Completely, yeah. I totally agree.
Charlie, a unorthodox question. I want to get your feelings on these Prince Purple Rain jerseys and the court. Such a unusual color scheme, but really cool, paying tribute to Prince. I'm a huge fan of Prince, so I think it's pretty cool. What is the feeling around the town in terms of the Wolves leaning into this? I don't feel like other teams are leaning into like their music icons. It is kind of have random themes, but this one seems personal in terms of the connection and how it reflects onto the court. Just kind of your thoughts on those jerseys and the court itself as well.
Yeah, no, the fans, they have been asking for them to return. The Wolves wore them for the first time in 2018-19, and then this year, league-wide, teams are bringing back old City Edition jerseys that fans liked in the past. First Avenue is right across the street from Target Center, and that's kind of a place that's become synonymous. It's a venue. It's became, known, associated with Prince. That's a big reason, why I think the team leaned into it. Obviously, his death really did kind of rock the state. You felt it. Paisley Park, I grew up about like 10 minutes from it. It's in Chanhassen, Minnesota, a little suburban part of Minnesota. There's a fence that's outside, and it was just lined with, people, art that after he had passed, just whatever, pictures of him, notes to him, whatever. And there's still a little portion of that fence all these years later that still remains with, whatever fan memorabilia dedicated to Prince. So he means a lot to this state. I love his music too, Justin. That's probably my favorite part of the jerseys is when it was Prince night, Saturday, it's Prince music all night long. Prince pregame music during the game, it's awesome. Purple everywhere. They didn't have the custom court in 2018 when they had the jersey for the first time. This was the first time that they've had that court going with the jerseys. So yeah, it's perfect. It's awesome. It's one of those jerseys that I think every fan would be okay with if they just kind of kept him around permanently as a City Edition, jersey. There's been rumblings that the Wolves are going to have new primary jerseys, this coming season, which I do think will probably happen. Just they've had these, the blue and white jerseys for coming up on 8 years now. So it's been a while. But regarding the Prince jerseys, yeah, they're great. They're awesome. I love them. And then we got those and the Black Trees jerseys, which fans do love as well. So the jersey rotation this year is very good. It's exactly the same as it was in 2019. They had both the Black jerseys, the Black Tree jerseys, and the Prince jerseys. So yeah, it's awesome.
I'd like to see him dig more into Minneapolis music. Have some Husker Du, the Replacements, Soul Asylum jerseys. Let's really just celebrate it. It's great music out of that area.
Yeah, they kind of had those. They had the multicolored jerseys, which a lot of people said were the Bob Dylan jerseys because of the mural in Minneapolis. I don't know. They weren't like necessarily tied directly to him. But yeah, I mean, I'd be cool with that. That'd be, insane to sound. That'd be cool. That'd be definitely be unique.
Charlie, I'm also hoping we can get your general perspective on just the NBA season. Just a few thoughts about what has jumped out to you. Can be, Western Conference, can be league at large. Just anything you've been seeing over the last few weeks that's really grabbed your attention.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest with you guys, it's the Thunder. League just 14-1. Again, they've been without J-Dub, and it's just like you're just gonna have to go through them again, probably. And that's what when I mentioned the second apron, that's been this whole thing of there's been a new champion every year, right? And for the last, I think it's 7 years or whatever, there's been no back-to-back champions. OKC is gonna give that a run for its money. They've been awesome. You kind of have that. I at least I do, like when a team wins a championship, like when the Celtics did before they kind of tore everything down, you kind of have that thought of like, well, they can't do it again. Like as great as they are, they can't do it again. It's like the Thunder come out and they've just been relatively unstoppable. Denver looks really, really good. Their new additions, Justin, I'm sure you could talk more about that. They've been, Tim Hardaway Jr. has been really good for them as well. They look really good. Houston, we'll see if that works out with Kevin Durant. Wemby, unfortunately, he's down right now. He's really fun to watch. The Spurs are in town at the end of November, so we'll see if he'll be in for that game. Probably not. But yeah, overall, my biggest takeaway is just how good the Western Conference is. And until an expansion happens and they move to the East, they're going to have to keep dealing with this. And again, I can tie it back into the Wolves, their greater professionalism and emphasis to win against these bad teams. That's important. It's really important because at the end of the season, you're going to look at the Thunder, probably going to be sitting at number 1. They're going to be fully healthy, and you're going to be like, shit, we got to go through that team again. And last year, they had our number. Denver so far has kind of had their number. So, biggest takeaway is how good the West is.
And out of those, I would say the 3 teams you mentioned there are kind of the top tier or upper echelon, certainly of the West. I think you're right. I think OKC is kind of head and shoulder above everyone else until something happens there. But Houston and Denver are also getting a lot of love lately in terms of projections. Is there any sort of advantages you see that the Timberwolves might have to surprise people against those matchups? Of course, against Houston, we haven't seen that really played out against that roster. So, who's to say right now if Houston is above the Timberwolves as far as power rankings go?
Yeah. Well, I think you can look to the fact that especially against Denver, the Wolves have played very well against the Nuggets this season. Obviously, like I mentioned, they're 0-2 against them, but both games are on the tail end of a back-to-back. They've been able to match up well against the Nuggets. They matched up really well against Durant and the Suns when they played in the playoffs a couple of years ago. So I think for the defensive struggles the Wolves are going through right now, I think the advantage they would have in a playoff series against these teams is the experience they have and the success that they've had. There is a blueprint for them to defend the Nuggets well, and it starts with taking away Jokic the passer, making him be the scorer. They have experience playing against these good teams. Again, it's just a matter of getting there, and another big thing too is having the stamina to not only beat one of Denver, but then also you're probably gonna have to go through Denver and Oklahoma City. Zach Lowe had a live show in Minneapolis, and he'd mentioned that he's like, I just don't know how you can get through both Denver and Oklahoma City in one playoff run, and I'm in agreement with him. That's would be really tough, and that was part of the problem both of these last 2 years with the Wolves. Is it's like you get to the Western Conference Finals and they were just outmatched both times, and they were kind of gassed because they had that really intense game 7-game series against Denver 2 years ago, and then they still had to work very hard to dispatch the Warriors, even though they didn't have. Well, I guess not very hard. It was it was a 5-game series, but still, it's a long season. You're playing near 100, if not more, games to win a championship. That is always going to be a thing that you're going to think about. But again, the Wolves have experience. They know what it takes. They know what it takes to have the stamina to last that long and to play that deep. It's just a matter of can you beat 2 really, really good, formidable, Western Conference opponents, bearing, something crazy like an injury. But
yeah, I'll totally let you. Charlie, thank you very much for the time. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where they can find you on social media, upcoming projects, and where they can find your work as well?
Yeah, Charlie Walton MN on Instagram and Twitter, and then you can catch me at Zone Coverage. I got a weekly column up there, so yeah.
Awesome. Charlie, thank you very much for the time. Good luck the rest of the way. Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Take care.